Well, hi, everybody. It's Lauren Underwood, and I have the honor of representing Illinois' 14th Congressional District. I know that I join you at a time when small businesses have been devastated by the pandemic. Many businesses across our community are fighting to stay afloat while also providing essential services that are keeping our communities running. As you know, just last week, the American Rescue Plan was signed into law. The American Rescue Plan will deliver relief for small businesses and communities across the nation. It provides $50 billion for new and existing small business relief programs, including strengthening and expanding the Paycheck Protection Program by providing an additional $7.25 billion. It boosts the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program with $15 billion for targeted advances. It establishes a new restaurant revitalization fund at the Small Business Administration for hard-hit restaurants and bars, funded at nearly $29 billion. And it provides an additional $1.25 billion for the Small Business Administration's Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program. I've heard from business owners that have closed their doors permanently or who are on the verge of closure, and business owners who've used the equity in their homes to stay open and they burned through their reserves. Just last Friday, I spoke to Margaret from Grace's Place, a childcare facility in Plano, to Ron Onesti, the owner of the Arcada Theater in St. Charles, and visited Expressly Leslie, a Middle Eastern restaurant in Woodstock. Each business owner and employee shared their experiences, struggles, and triumphs throughout this past year. And I want you to know that I hear you, I see you, and I'm fighting for you every day. I remain focused on ensuring our community has the resources that we need to build back stronger than ever. I'll continue to fight for our families to ensure they have access to the vaccinations and resources for our businesses and state and local governments, so that we can reopen schools and businesses and rebuild our communities. In addition to the American Rescue Plan, this Tuesday, well, actually, it was yesterday. We got a little delayed. I voted in support of the Paycheck Protection Program Extension Act, which would extend the PPP application deadline from March 31st to May 31st. This would ensure that small businesses and the Small Business Administration have adequate time to submit and process applications. In addition to legislation, my team and I are committed to ensuring our constituents are treated fairly by federal programs. Our casework team has recovered over $11 million for constituents in the form of Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits, tax refunds, and more. And my team is available to assist you with issues or questions that you have with the SBA, the IRS, and any other federal agency. The casework team has also been able to help constituents with both PPP and EIDL fraud and delayed funding, and recovered over $700,000. So please, please, please reach out to us if you need any help. I'd now like to hand it over to Bo Steiner. Welcome back, Bo, the District Director for the Illinois SBA office, to give you a more in-depth look of the SBA programs and answer any questions that you have. Thanks again for being with us. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Thanks, Congresswoman Underwood. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and certainly the opportunity to speak to your constituents about the SBA programs. And as you mentioned, there's a lot going on right now in the small business space. So really good information I think we'll be able to share today, and hopefully help all of you navigate the various programs and how they fit within your respective business and nonprofit too. I always like to make sure that we cover that as well. So thanks again for having me today. I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll get right into it. So what I want to do today is talk about all the programs that SBA has going on. I'm going to prioritize most of the programs related that were part of the Economic Aid Act at the end of December, and I'll touch on the new programs as part of the America's Rescue Plan, and so that you've got a good context for everything that's going on. We're currently working to integrate all of the legislation that was in the America's Rescue Plan into our existing programs that we're running right now. So there's a lot of moving parts, but hopefully this will help you sort through everything that's going on. So how I wanted to cover today's discussion was really to look at our loan programs that are in place, some grant programs, and I have some to add here as well, and then answer any questions that y'all might have. Certainly there are options. There's a Q&A. I think there's a chat. One or the other, go ahead and put your questions in there, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can at the end of the presentation. I certainly will give ample time for that part of the program here today. But when you look at the various funding programs that are available right now through the SBA or will be available very soon, we've got what I would characterize as our loan programs, and that includes the Paycheck Protection Program, and then our grant programs, which are, as it would say, they're grants and or payments to businesses. So we'll bucket them that way. Now, touching on the Economic Aid Act, which was passed December 27th of 2020, there were a number of PPP program implications that were part of that, including expanding Paycheck Protection Program eligibility and how the funds can be used. So there were additional entities, types of businesses that could participate in the program, which has been further expanded through the America's Rescue Plan, as well as additional funds that were eligible uses of proceeds from your PPP loan. So those included covered operating expenses, many of which are more of the, I would say, cloud-based types of tools that businesses are using right now to conduct business in this virtual environment that many businesses are forced to enter. As an example, a restaurant maybe uses some kind of tool to process orders for to-go, things like that. You've also got some coverage for worker protection. Worker protection expenses are also covered expenses for the purposes of PPP. So again, we'll talk through the specifics, but those are some of the things that happen there. Second piece that I think was really relevant is that borrowers can select a covered period between 8 and 24 weeks. So that gives you the option, and your covered period is basically that period within which you have to expend the funds and have those expenditures be eligible for forgiveness. What the legislation did is it said you can choose anywhere between 8 and 24 weeks, which gives you as the business owner more flexibility and more options to support 100% forgiveness of that PPP loan. Big news was that it offered second draw PPP loans as an option for hardest hit businesses. And again, this is a second bite of the apple for PPP. So it means you already took that first draw. Now you are seeking a second draw to just provide additional resources for your business. And we'll talk about some of the characteristics or the eligibility criteria that are involved there. Congress also ensured that expenses used to support forgiveness for PPP were also deductible for the purposes of your taxes. So that's big news for many small businesses that were looking at potentially some kind of adverse tax event related to PPP. Input simplified forgiveness for PPP loans of up to $150,000. Again, this is really big. As far as the 3508S, which is the simplified application for forgiveness, it doesn't require you to submit any documents at the time of application for forgiveness. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have to have the supporting documentation. You do have to maintain that. But as far as the application itself, very simple, very streamlined, and it goes up to $150,000. And then finally, we don't subtract the idle advance payments from the PPP loan forgiveness amount. That was something that was in place in the CARES Act, but has been changed to basically disconnect those two programs from each other. So I would say that if I could characterize it, all of these actions that happened as part of the Economic Aid Act were really beneficial to the business owner. And as I mentioned, and as Congresswoman Underwood mentioned, the America's Rescue Plan, as it relates to PPP, expanded the eligible entities that could participate in the program and also added an additional $7.5 billion to the program. Now, more recently, at the beginning of this month of March, we made some policy changes to provide for more equitable relief for mom and pop businesses. So our Main Street businesses, those businesses we rely on day in, day out in our communities. A couple things there. Number one was increasing support for independent contractors, sole proprietors, and self-employed. So we changed the calculation methodology for those PPP loans for sole proprietors to be more advantageous. You can use the gross revenue number versus what was previously the gross profit. So big change there typically would result in an increased loan amount for that borrower. We also changed some rules around access to returning citizens by eliminating restrictions for certain ex-felons to participate in the program. Normally, or previously, we had in place rules related to delinquency on federal debt, where if you had that kind of debt, you weren't eligible to participate in PPP. Rules have been changed to address those with student loan debt that were in default, that you can still apply for PPP. And then finally, increased access to eligible immigrant-owned small businesses. So those that maybe don't have a Social Security number, we changed the requirements so that if you are in the country, you're a legal resident and you maybe have an ITIN, you can use that as part of your application for PPP. So again, trying to expand the pool of folks that are eligible to apply for the program. Now, for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with the PPP, just to give some clarity around that, PPP is a loan program where you apply with private sector lenders, and the loan is based on your average monthly payroll from either average monthly payroll costs from either 2019 or 2020. It's solely based on those payroll costs times 2.5 for your first draw loan. That's the first loan you've taken through the PPP program. And I think it's notable that it's not a credit-based program. So credit check, that sort of thing is not part of the process to determine your eligibility for the program. It's solely based on those payroll costs, those payroll expenses. Now, it is a loan, but the big thing and the big benefit that you receive in addition to that short-term working capital is that you can also have that loan fully forgiven, meaning the federal government pays that off on your behalf if you use the funds within the program guidelines, which means that at least 60% of the proceeds of that PPP go towards payroll expenses. And then you can have up to 40% go towards other eligible expenses, which I'll talk about in a moment. Now, if you're looking at a first draw, there are certain eligibility criteria that you need to meet, which include you must have been in business as of February 15, 2020. And you have to be an eligible entity. So you have to have 500 or fewer employees. And finally, you must apply on or before March 31st, 2021. And that's the deadline at this point in time. But again, as Congresswoman Underwood mentioned, there may be some changes coming on that front. We'll see. Again, first draw is going to be your first bite of the apple. The last thing I wanted to mention is you do need to certify that you require the funds through the PPP to support the ongoing operations of your business. So that's really important as well. And you'll see how there's some differences between the first draw and the second draw. As far as eligible entities, again, this is based on the Economic Aid Act. We've got additional entities that are eligible as part of the America's Rescue Plan. So I'm not going to get into the new eligible entities based on the America's Rescue Plan because we're still sorting that all out. But I think important to note that newly eligible are those housing cooperatives, destination marketing organizations, certain 501c6s, for example, chambers of commerce, and eligible news organizations. But throughout the program, eligible entities have included sole proprietors, independent contractors, and self-employed individuals. Really important to note, like even the smallest business, I'm an independent contractor, I'm an Uber driver, I'm an attorney, I'm a psychologist. Those types of sole proprietors are eligible to apply for income replacement. Even if you don't have any employees, you still have somebody that you're paying, and that's you. Other types of business entities are also eligible. So your S Corps, your LLCs, your partnerships, your C Corps, all eligible. 501c3 nonprofits, 501c19s, and tribal businesses. So a broad range of entities are eligible to apply. For first draw loans, you just have to have 500 or fewer employees, is the size limitation on that front. Now, many people got PPP in the first draw, in the first round in 2020. So the Economic Aid Act allowed for second draw PPP loans. And basically the eligibility criteria for that are that borrowers must have previously received a PPP loan, have 300 or fewer employees, and suffered a 25% reduction in gross receipts in one quarter in 2020 versus the same quarter in 2019. So the second draw PPP is definitely more targeted towards those most impacted businesses. Maximum loan size is $2 million, again, based on the average monthly payroll or payroll expenses in 2019 or 2020. And generally speaking, that max loan size is going to be 2.5 times that average monthly payroll. Now, there is an exception where if you're a business in the food and accommodations industry, you can go up to 3.5 times average monthly payroll. And that's based on your NAICS code, which is North American Industry Code System. And those entities that are eligible for that 3.5x loan would be start with a NAICS code of 72. So just be aware of that. Now, from a process standpoint, again, this is a loan program that is offered through what we call delegated lenders. So private sector lenders who actually administer the program on SBA's behalf. First thing you want to do, if you haven't already, is find your PPP lender. So what we're recommending right now is to go to sba.gov/paycheck protection/find. We have a list of participating lenders. So look at that list, see if there's lenders in your community that are participating in the program, contact them as potential options to provide you with or to apply for that PPP loan. You can also reach out to small business development centers who SBA supports, chambers of commerce. Many different organizations have contacts into the lending community and know who those lenders are that are accepting applications for PPP. And of course, you can always go to your existing banking relationship and apply there if they're supporting the program. Second step is going to be completing your application. You're going to include all of your supporting documentation. And basically what that means is the application is really streamlined, right? It's a 1 to 2 page document, depending on which application you're using. And basically you will provide certain documentation to support that application. If you're a sole proprietor and you file a Schedule C, then it would be your 2019 or 2020 1040 Schedule C to document that gross revenue or that net profit. If you're an S Corp and you have payroll, then you would provide your IRS Form 941s and your W-2, W-3s as support for your payroll expenses in the year that you have determined. So that's the kind of documentation the lender is going to want to see in order to support these loans. Now, when you're completing the application, it might be a PDF that you fill out, it might be an online tool. Each lender has their own process by which they're accepting applications. So just be aware of that. When you do identify your lender, understanding how they accept applications is going to be really important. One thing I would say is that, in advance of going to your lender to actually apply, you can whenever go and identify who that lender is, but I recommend you go and you download the appropriate application for your particular situation, whether it's first draw or second draw from the SBA's website. You can find all the information there at sba.gov/PPP. Now, you submit your application, the lender will send it to SBA for final approval. We run some checks on our end. For example, we want to make sure that people can't receive two PPP loans because you can only receive one at a time, one first draw, one second draw. Some other checks that we will do, once it's approved with SBA, we send a loan number to the lender, and then they have 10 days to disperse those funds to you. On the date of that disbursement, that begins your covered period, and then you have up to 24 weeks to expend the funds and have those expenses be eligible for forgiveness. Again, currently the deadline for a lender to get approval from SBA is March 31st of this month. Now, I mentioned this is a loan, right? So it's a loan made by the private sector lender. And these loans are a fixed rate loan, 1%, 5-year term. There's no requirement for collateral or personal guarantees. There's no fees for prepayment penalties. And basically, what your responsibility for these loans will be is for any amount that is not forgiven, principal and interest that are not for part of the principal and any interest associated to the principal that's not forgiven as part of the loan. So I'll talk a little bit about the forgiveness process in a second. But basically what's going to happen is, as a borrower, you receive the loan, you have your covered period up, based on what you determine it to be and what your needs are. From the end of your covered period, you have 10 months before you have to start making principal and interest payments on the PPP loan. At that time, your lender should have provided you with the payment terms going forward. Now, anytime in that 10-month period, you can go ahead and apply for forgiveness, which means that you're going to fill out your application for forgiveness based on the one that's right for you. You send it to your lender, they review it, make sure that everything looks right. They send it to SBA. SBA goes ahead and does a final review and makes a final determination on the forgiveness amount. Once that's complete, they will remit that forgiveness amount to the lender on your behalf. And if it's 100% of your loan, great. You no longer have a PPP loan outstanding any longer. If it's some amount less than the accrued principal, or if the forgiveness amount is less than 100%, then any remaining principal and the interest associated to that principal will be due over the term of that loan. All right. So that's PPP kind of in a nutshell. I know I went through it pretty quickly. A lot of people are familiar with the program so far, but again, it's a really great program to help you fund your payroll and those other eligible expenses that I mentioned earlier. And again, those eligible expenses include both your payroll expenses, that's cash compensation, and other non-cash benefits like retirement contributions, healthcare contributions, those sorts of things, as well as certain state and local taxes associated to payroll costs. But in the non-payroll eligible expenses, you've got rent, you've got mortgage interest, you've got utilities, and then those other newly added expenses, including those covered operations costs, covered supplier costs, covered worker protection expenses. So big deal there. All right. Next program to touch on here is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Again, Congresswoman Underwood mentioned that this program has been funded with additional funding as part of America's Rescue Plan. And this is a direct loan program. So you apply for and receive the loan directly through SBA. It's a long-term working capital loan up to 30 years at low interest rates. So 3.75% for businesses, 2.75% for nonprofits. And loans over $25,000, there are collateral requirements for those loans over $25,000, but there is no personal guarantee for loans under $200,000. So just note that. The economic injury disaster loan right now is capped at $150,000 per eligible entity, but whether you're a sole proprietor, nonprofit, small business, you are eligible to apply for the program within certain constraints. But generally speaking, those types of organizations are eligible. And we base the loan amount off of the information that you provide via your 2019 tax returns. Key element is you need to have been in business as of January 31st of 2020. And you need to be able to demonstrate that adverse economic impact through the documentation, tax documentation, that sort of thing that's provided. Now, one thing that a lot of folks don't know is that with the economic injury disaster loan, if you've exhausted all of those funds, you may be able to request additional funding through the SBA, so increasing your EIDL loan. And there is a really great FAQ in that we provided that walks you through step-by-step how to make that request for an increase up to that maximum of $150,000. So if you want to learn more, go to sba.gov/coronavirus, navigate to the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, and there's an FAQ that will, I think it's on page 8, that will walk you through the specific steps to request that loan increase. Other good news on this front is the EIDL has been extended through the end of this calendar year, so December 31st, and the initial payments have been deferred for up to 24 months now. It was originally 12 months. Now that's up to 24 months before you'll actually start having to make payments on principal and interest on these economic injury disaster loans. Next program I wanted to touch on is the Targeted EIDL Advance Payments Program. This is a new program, but based loosely on the original emergency EIDL advance payments that were made in 2020. Now, this is a more targeted program, as the name would imply, where to be eligible, you have to meet a couple of key criteria. Number one, you had to have applied for the EIDL advance payment in 2020, and either you received some payment of less than $10,000 through the EIDL advance, or you didn't receive any payment because of exhaustion of funds. Second key element is you need to have 300 or fewer employees, need to be located in a low-income community, and you need to be able to demonstrate at least a 30% revenue reduction over an 8-week period in 2020 when compared to a similar 8-week period in 2019. So those are the key criteria there. Now, for those that are eligible to apply, or I guess that's the wrong way to put it. There is not currently an application that you can go to a website and sign up for this. SBA is inviting participation from those groups that I mentioned previously who had previously applied for the emergency EIDL advance payments. And we're sending emails out daily to invite new participants in the program. If you are invited to apply, you provide your information, which includes potentially, information from your 2019 tax returns, additional verification on banking information, that sort of thing, and you meet all the other eligibility criteria, then the payment that you will receive will be the balance of will be an amount that will bring the total between your EIDL advance payment and your targeted EIDL advance payment to $10,000 total. So that's, and the first group that we're working with are those that did receive an EIDL advance payment of less than $10,000. Now, the second group that we're looking at who applied but did not receive it, they'll be eligible to receive a full $10,000 payment, assuming that they meet all of the eligibility criteria. Again, SBA is sending emails out to invite you to participate, so make sure you're looking out for that. We have seen instances where the emails from SBA get caught in your spam filter, other things, so just make sure that you're keeping an eye on that. And there's also a mapping tool on our website, which will walk you through, or which will allow you to search your particular business location. It's a physical business location to see if you are in a low-income community or not. And the definition of low-income community is based on IRS IRS regulations that were issued, some time ago and relate to the new markets tax credit. So just be aware that there's a way that you can check to see if your particular business is in a low income community. Let's see. If you have questions, you can go to targetedadvance@sba.gov. It's a great way to get further information on the program. And if you are approved, you receive an email and ACH deposit to the bank account you have provided. Big thing here that I want to emphasize is if you are invited to apply for the targeted EIDL advance payment, is make sure that you double check all of the information you're providing, make sure it's accurate and correct. If there are mistakes at this point in time, there is no ability to accept reconsiderations for these. So you need to get it right for upfront. All right. So just be really cautious about how you're processing or the information you're putting in to that application. Now, the next program I wanted to touch on is the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. This is a grant program for live performance venues, promoters, museums, movie theaters, talent representatives, and it offers grants of up to $10 million for those types of entities, presuming that they meet certain business criteria. It's fairly complicated set of requirements because it was very specific to these types of entities. And so kind of the process for this and the best place for information is sba.gov/SVOG. But know that there's a FAQ there that walks you through step-by-step all of the eligibility criteria. There's lots of questions that you may have if you believe you are an eligible entity to help you make that determination. One of the big things that changed as part of America's Rescue Plan related to SVOG is that now, previously you couldn't receive both the PPP after December 27th and SVOG. America's Rescue Plan changed the law so that eligible entities could apply for PPP now prior to receipt of an SVO grant, and then also we're still eligible to apply for that SVO grant. Now, note that the amount of your PPP loan will be subtracted out of the amount of the grant that you would be eligible for. So that's the kind of consideration there. But nevertheless, really good news for lots of venues and other eligible entities that really were worried about being able to get PPP because of the time constraints. You can do that, you can apply, but then still take advantage of the SVO grant program. So good news there. If you are interested in the SVO grant program, again, recommend you go to our website, the sba.gov/SVO grant. Recommend you get registered in SAM.gov, System for Award Management. That's one of the requirements for the program. And again, you can see there the amount of potential grants, which, it has to be $10 million or based off your gross earned revenue. And that's going to be the lesser of the two. So just be advised on that front. The other grant program I'm just going to touch on because we don't have a lot of information and details for you at this point in time is the restaurant grant program. I believe it's $28 billion, something to that effect, that's available for restaurants and focused on restaurants. Now, these again are grants, I believe up to $5 million, and will help, basically looks at 2019 revenues versus 2020. And for those eligible restaurants, the difference, they're eligible for a grant to kind of make up the difference on the 2020 versus 2019. So looks to be a really important program and really helpful, especially to those restaurants that have been so hard hit. More to come on that program as we flesh out the process and procedure for applying for it, but just know that that is coming very, very soon. I know there's a lot of interest and pressure for us to move on this program. Couple other things just to touch on before we get to Q&A is debt relief. We did provide through the Economic Aid Act additional debt relief, meaning that as the federal government on your behalf, if you're an SBA borrower, paid off some period of principal and interest on behalf of the business. Now that depends on the type of business, what industry, et cetera, when you received your loan, these sorts of things, but it affects those of you who may have a 7A 504 microloan that's guaranteed through SBA. So if you believe that you may be fit into that group, recommend you reach out to your lender to find out more about how you are affected by the SBA debt relief. And the last thing I'll touch on is there is an additional targeted EIDL advance payment program that we're implementing that looks at even more adversely impacted businesses. Some of the criteria for this targeted EIDL advance payment are the same as for the original targeted advance, which include the 300 or fewer employees, the low-income community location, and the revenue decrease. But in this case, the revenue decrease is 50% over that 8-week period. So just know that that's an additional $5,000, that payment that may be available to you as a business owner. So lots of resources available here for you. You've got SBA resource partners, the Illinois Small Business Development Center, SCORE, Women's Business Centers. You can find your closest resource at sba.gov/local-assistance. And you also have the district office here in Chicago, and our branch office in Springfield can also be of assistance. If you want to reach us, it's illinois.do@sba.gov. You can see that information here. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and we probably get into some Q&A.
Bo, thank you so much for all of that really great information. So if any of the attendees have questions, you should be able to type it into the Q&A function. And if you are on the phone, if you'd like to raise your hand, you can press *9, and that'll show me that you've got your hand raised. I think we've got one question in the Q&A so far, Bo.
Okay, yep. Let's see. We reopened our business, coffee shop, live entertainment venue on December 26th, 2019. So we not qualify for a second loan based on the quarter-to-quarter loss. I did lay off 15 people. I have no funds left to restart as we open up. Do you have any suggestions? Let's see. So yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I think you've got a couple of different things that may be available to you. Number one is, depending on the amount, we'd be looking at, would, for example, a microloan be, could you access something like that, or could you go to, access more of like a 7A, which is a working capital loan through a lender that's guaranteed by SBA. We have made some changes to those programs wherein we have provided increased guarantees. So we are kind of taking off some of the risk that lenders may feel like they're looking at when they work with business owners to approve loans. The other thing I'd say is, as a coffee shop, you may be eligible. I don't have enough information, but you may be eligible for the restaurant grants when they come out. That's kind of TBD. We haven't pushed out the eligibility criteria just yet, but that may be something else to explore. What I'd say is, one of the things that may be helpful is to go ahead and take a look and engage with a small business development center. I know there's many excellent SBDCs within Congresswoman Underwood's territory or district, I'm sorry, including Waubonsie has a really great SBDC. And there's many others. So encourage you to go ahead and touch base with them, and they can help think through some of the challenges you're facing and maybe some options for access to capital. Are there any limitations to businesses that fail to comply with the governor's orders regarding closing, e.g. restaurants that stayed open? I'm not aware of anything in federal rules related to these programs that are relevant to that particular question. So I guess I can't really speak to that. I'm not aware of anything that would constrain somebody from applying, even if they were not opened up. However, I would presume that there would be some revenue impacts that may not have happened if they were able to, if they stayed open, I don't know, and may limit their eligibility. Let's see, any way to address the question of the new calculations for PPP loans and single owner corporations that have regular tax filing and not a Schedule C? So at this time, the only adjustments for sole proprietors is based on that Schedule C calculation change that has come through. We haven't made any changes as it relates to partnerships. And if you're like a S Corp or something like that, you know, again, it's still going to be based on the payroll and basically what you pay yourself as the owner of that business. So the Schedule C is the only change that we've made most recently. And I'm not sure that I expect additional changes barring congressional action on that front. Let's see.
We've got one gentleman on the phone, David. I'm going to allow you to ask your question, David. I think you might have to press *6 to unmute.
Hello.
Great.
All right. The question is on a lot of small corporations, the owners are pay themselves on dividends when the corporations have money. They're not able to carry a normal regular payroll. We're actually in the event business, so we pay seasonally as the events generate revenues. So the question's twofold. One, we would actually fall under the shuttered grant, but you know, with the grants, it's always a question as to whether you're going to be chosen, for lack of a better word on it. But getting back to the PPP question, so if you're a single owner corporation, and I apologize, I have a puppy lab that's being rude. If you're a single owner corporation and you pay yourself on corporate disbursements and not regular payroll, then there is no regular payroll to show. And as a result, there's zero qualification for any PPP loan. We have spoken to our bank and they do not have an answer for it, but they said they've had a lot of customers that now are completely reevaluating the way they handle payroll and even being incorporated. You know, at that point, what's the difference? We're in an industry, we're incorporated strictly for liability protections, not, we pay a lot more fees being incorporated, and it seems like we're being penalized for those additional legal fees, accounting fees, higher tax rates, and everything else. But we're still just a single entity, and we have the same return on our corporate tax form. It's just not a Schedule C, it's the actual return for the corporation with gross and net. Is there any way, or do you foresee any potential changes down the road where small single owner corporations will be able to take advantage of the new PPP calculations on gross versus net? You know, gross versus payroll.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I also appreciate the situation that you're expressing, for sure. You know, the challenge, you know, as far as kind of trying to predict what is going to happen, I'd say I don't have those powers. But you know, I certainly, it's conceivable that they could change those calculations, but you know, again, I don't know if that would happen I think it's unlikely it would happen before the March 31st deadline, but I think the administration and the leadership in SBA is always looking at ways to improve these programs and maximize the positive impact of the program, while also, ensuring that people aren't taking advantage of, of it to the extent that it's kind of unfair to others. So we kind of try to balance that stuff, but, I'm happy to provide that feedback through our chain of command for sure. And I'm sure that Congresswoman Underwood's team is also taking notes on this as well. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bo. It looks like we don't have any other questions in the Q&A. So I'll give everyone just one more minute in case you've got something to type. And Bo, I do have a question. We've had a couple constituents reach out regarding the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, and they've looked through the eligibility, but they're still not quite sure if they're eligible. What is the best way for them to find out, if they truly are eligible?
So it's really, unfortunately, we can't advise businesses on whether they're eligible or not. It's really dependent upon the business or the entity itself to really understand for their particular type of entity, whether they perceive themselves to be as eligible. I think there may be some businesses that are kind of like, I think I might fit, but may not be like directly. So a couple things that I would recommend is, number one, look at the FAQ, and that continues to be updated on a weekly basis. So keep looking at that. There are some additional eligibility documents on the website now that outline some specific items related to eligibility. And I know this sounds painful, but it's also not a bad idea to just take the original legislation as well.
Yep.
So the Economic Aid Act on December 27th, it has really good information, and it's pretty plain language, at least for a non-lawyer like me to kind of read through it and at least get a sense of what was contemplated as part of the program. So I think that can also help to provide context for your internal analysis.
Great.
So that's what I would recommend.
Is there a penalty for someone who thinks that they're eligible, they apply? Is there any penalty other than they just might not be given the grant?
No, I mean, I think, no, I mean, if you kind of maybe on the border and you're kind of like, I'm not sure, but I'm going to apply anyway, I think it's kind of no harm, no foul. I mean, there certainly may be consequences if you actually know you're not eligible and you're trying to create documentation, like kind of defrauding the government. But generally speaking, I think if you're acting in good faith, then, that's, if you're not eligible, you're not eligible, and you'll just get a decline on the grant.
Right. Great. It looks like we've got two more questions in the Q&A, and then I know we've got to wrap up soon. So.
Yeah, so let's see, we've got, can local or mobile entertainment or amusement companies be added to the shuttered program, or can we be listed under the live entertainment venue? I'm not sure exactly what that would, comprise of. The legislation was super specific on who's eligible and who's not, to the extent that there are certain business practices that a business has to meet, as well as certain physical characteristics that the enterprise would have to meet. So again, I would, the legislation is very specific. We don't have latitude to change who's eligible and who's not. So from my perspective, it's really incumbent on you as the potential applicant to go ahead and really dig through that FAQ, the eligibility criteria, to see if you believe you may or may not meet those eligibility criteria. But as far as the SBO, we're looking at sometime early April application launch date. So it's coming up in a couple weeks, or several weeks, I'd say, here that we hit April, and hopefully that will open up pretty soon. I'm sure I'm not the only business that opened in December. Do you think there'll be changes to base any future funding based on payroll and the idea that businesses in first year have it the worst of the situation. So, again, I think that's going to be predicated on actions that Congress would contemplate on their front as to how they want to structure future programs. We hate to say it, but I don't hate to say it, but I guess, the bottom line is we just apply the law that was created, and they put certain constraints in that program to support those businesses. And I realize, I've heard from many, many businesses that it start at the end of 2019 or early 2020 that weren't able to take as much advantage of these programs, or even after February 15th, they weren't able to take as much advantage of these programs as they would have liked. And, it's unfortunate. I also think it's based on, to some extent, that we thought this was going to be a shorter period of time where we'd be in this circumstance. So it's a long answer saying, yeah, I think that would be something that Congress would have to work through and make a determination.
All right, well, I think that's all the questions we've had. Bo, thank you so much. We know you are incredibly busy. Congresswoman Underwood, our entire team, and our constituents really appreciate you being here today. And just thank you for your time. And just for everyone who's on here, this has been recorded, so I will be sending it out just as soon as I can to make sure that if you missed any portion of it, you have got the recording of this video.
Great, thank you, Ashley. And my thanks to Congresswoman Underwood as well. Appreciate the chance to be here.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
All right, bye-bye, everybody.